we are in a very unique labor market. I don't want to say shortage. How do I want to phrase it? Everybody's hiring right now, and there's maybe not enough workers out there. There are workers, I think, if you do things, the right way. And I think that um, obviously without people, I can't grow my business. I have to have people. Um, how are you guys seeing the last 12 to 24 months, the current job market for contractors? Like, how is that being viewed from your guys' angle? What are your contractors telling you?
They're telling us that it's very challenging, and we hear all the same things that you guys would, and there's certainly a fairly um familiar and common feeling of there's no good people. Um, this is a lot harder than it used to be. Where did all of the talent go? And to your point, like how were we feeling over the last 12 to 24 months? The research and the reading that I've done on this actually suggests that this talent shortage, if you want to call it that, this goes back a lot further than people realize, all the way back to the 2008 sort of financial meltdown that we had here in North America, but globally as well. So I'll tell you, I'll just kind of give you a bit of a backstory on this, at least my perspective on how we got here, Michael. In 2008, obviously, like, the economy imploded. We had this housing market crash. The banks stopped lending, and that resulted in about a 70% decrease in new construction starts. We're going back like 14 years now, so some people remember that. Some people that are listening weren't even in business for that chapter, but that did happen, and what that led to was about 1.5 million people, construction workers, 1.5 million construction workers leaving the sector to either go get jobs elsewhere or retire. Right. So that's a huge knock to the system, a big shock to the talent pool that we had. In the 10 years between 2010 and 2020, what we saw is construction jobs slowly recover. There's a huge stimulus package that Obama signed off on in 2009. Things started to get rolling again. And if you look at this on a graph, what you'll see is right at 2020, we had essentially recovered. We were at about the same level of construction workers available as we were pre-2008. And then 2020 comes, and we all know what happened. We have the COVID pandemic. So we lost another million employees in like right off the hop, very, very quickly, over a matter of weeks, in about March of 2020. Now it should be stated that construction was deemed essential. You'll remember that, like, early on in the pandemic, we sort of got given the green light to go back to work and resume, and there were some rules in place and things we had to do to be more careful. But compared to, say, hospitality or travel, restaurants, a whole host of other industries, we were sort of quietly said, hey, you guys can get back to work a lot earlier than other people. And so what that meant is about 80% of those million that lost their jobs at the beginning of the pandemic returned, but 20% didn't. And I think the exact number that I looked at was we're still down about 238,000 workers compared to pre-pandemic levels. So if you're trying to, if contractors are out there wondering, hey, what the hell happened? It didn't used to be like this. Those are two huge shocks to the system that really can't be ignored if you're trying to understand this. And I'm always a big fan of actually understanding a problem before you go and start trying to solve it with tactics or strategies. The backstory matters a great deal. While all this has happened, right, over the last 14 or so years, it's also really important to remember that a talent market, a labor market, functions like any other market that we know, right? There are supply forces, demand forces. There's a price that moves around. You can look at this through the lens of a economics 101, classroom. very, very easily. And so there's a few other features to this market that I think need to be understood. First of all, we have an aging workforce. In 2014, the average age of a construction worker was about 40.5. In 2021, that is up to 42.9. So that's nearly 2.5 years. The mean has moved up nearly 2.5 years over a 7-year period. That's pretty significant. And there's reasons for that. I think a really obvious one is there's been a huge decline in shop classes in our education system, right? Like, you remember going to high school, Michael, and being able to do woodworking or automotive or go to metal shop, right? Like, these very like tradesy, hands-on type classroom environments that were available. Those have been defunded or scrapped altogether in large swaths of our public education system, which I don't think was a very good idea. There's also a huge amount more options for young people to look at when they're thinking of starting the career and entering the job force. There's a very common trend I notice that sort of happens when people talk about the labor market and the challenges with it, which is essentially just like bashing young people. Millennials suck and Gen Zers are the worst and they just stare at their phone. And it's like, you're essentially writing off a cohort of 70 million people just saying that they're terrible. And that's the reason you can't build your team, which I think is a huge cop out. And we can get to that later. The reality is, like, the economy has proliferated. The choices that they have are more widespread. And I feel that construction and trades, roofing, like just contracting in particular, has not kept up with the times when it comes to their employer brand, the recruiting and hiring systems, et cetera. So anyway, those are some reasons that we have a decreasing talent supply, right? If you're looking at this from an economic perspective, like, there are fewer people to choose from. That is true. COVID-19 has made that especially difficult more recently. Sort of depending on where you live, there's been policies or money made available for people to stay at home or not work. And I think people are experiencing a certain like lethargic workforce. Now, while that has happened, the talent supply has decreased. We've seen an increase in demand for it. Unprecedented stimulus because of COVID-19. I think the number I found most commonly is 9 trillion with a T in spending in stimulus. It's about like 20 to 40%. No one really knows, but it's a huge percentage of the USD money supply was printed in the last 2 years. Prime interest rates have been held at an all-time low. And while that's happened, travel restrictions, border closures, a close down of like restaurants and bars and things to do, all of these places where you normally would spend your disposable income have been taken away. And what that means is that while homeowners have gotten more wealthy because of the stimulus and because of what's happened in the stock market, there's been a pent-up demand that's pressurized construction, home renovations, stuff like that. People are hunkering down to get through COVID, and all of that money, I know a lot of our listeners will have felt this over the last 2 years, has gone to them. We've had this COVID boom sort of event, which is bizarre. No one could have guessed that would happen, but that is essentially what has happened for home service companies, contractors, etc. And so what that means for a labor perspective is that literally anyone with half a brain and steel-toed boots is employed already. And so if you're listening to this going, man, I feel the pinch, like, those are some big things to be aware of as to why.